And from 1819 until Civil War, that's going to be a big deal. They're going to be keeping score. The North and South are keeping score, making sure the other doesn't end up with more influence in the Senate by having more senators because of more states. So in 1819, when Alabama goes into the Union as a slave state, the balance between the free states and the slave states stood at 11 each. Both had 22 senators in Congress, and everybody was fairly happy. Well, the conflict begins when the Missouri Territory wants to come into the Union, and they want to come in as a slave state. And if they're allowed to come into the Union as a slave state, the balance of power in the Senate is going to favor the South 24 to 22. And who's going to be upset? Northerners. Okay? It's a delicate thing throughout. And it was going to lead to a serious conflict between North and South. And when you have the possibility of a conflict, what do you have to come up with? The C word, a compromise. Okay? So, I mean, history's happening. Missouri wants to come in. They want to come in as a slave state. It's going to screw up the balance of power in the Senate. It's going to cause some ill feelings between North and South. So somebody has to come up with a compromise. Well, the man that came up with the compromise was a member of the House of Representatives named James Tallmadge. And he did that on February 13th of 1819. So on February 13th of 1819, a member of the House of Representatives, James Tallmadge of New York, offered a compromise that might save ill feelings between North and South. February 13, 1819, member of the House of Representatives, James Tallmadge of New York, offers a compromise.
Is he on North or South?
Well, you tell me what you think here.
South.
Where's he from?
Tell us.
Yeah, New York. Okay, now, when you're a state and you apply for admission into the United States, you have to send in an application, kind of like you apply for a job, okay? Formal application to get in. Well, what Tallmadge did is he proposed an amendment to that application that Missouri sent in. In other words, Missouri sent it in, but he's going to amend it to say something that might be agreeable by the Congress. So Tallmadge amends Missouri's application to be admitted into the Union, and this amendment becomes known in American history as the Tallmadge Amendment. So he's going to add something to their amendment. So you send an application for change in the school. You want everybody to be able to wear hats in school. Okay? And that's going to cause controversy between the old people that are old-fashioned in school and the young people. And you know it's going to be a hassle. So somebody steps in and takes that application or takes that proposal to wear hats and adds something to it that might make both sides agree. Because they're not going to agree if it's just one way or the other. Does that kind of make sense? Well, here's what he put in his amendment, okay, concerning Missouri wanting to come into the Union as a slave state. This is what he said. Admit Missouri into the Union as a slave state. Okay, they're asking to be put in. But here's the two stipulations, the two things that he put into the amendment. Go ahead and let them come in as a slave state. However, number one, once Missouri is admitted into the Union as a slave state, the further introduction of slavery will be illegal. So go ahead and let them in as a slave state. But the further introduction of slavery will be illegal. So what are they saying? So if Talon has slaves already, she can have those slaves when Missouri's admitted into the Union. But when Connor moves in, or if Connor is already there, he cannot bring more in from outside the state. Okay? Any slaves that are in the territory now that belong to people, you can have as slaves, but you can't bring any more in. Okay? That was the first thing that he proposed. Let them in, but once they're in, the introduction of further slavery will be illegal. He also put this in his amendment. Once Missouri was admitted into the Union, all children that were born into slavery in Missouri would be free on their 25th birthday. So, if Talon has 200 slaves, and she has 100 that are less than 25 years old that were born in Missouri, once those children, so to speak, get to be 25, they are free.
Wouldn't the slave owners just, like, shoot them or something like, you know, like work them to death or?
How would they know
Hard
when
to
their
say.
birthday is then?
Well, would be a guess. That would be a guess. They started to have to try to keep better records, but that's a good point. But that's what he proposed. Well, once he proposed that and attached that to their application, it went to Congress, where both the House of Representatives and the Senate would vote on it. Okay? Well, since he was a member of the House, guess what? House passed it, but the Senate rejected it. That doesn't work. That won't make it work. So, Talmadge's compromise doesn't really work, doesn't go through. The House passes it, but the Senate rejects it, which means it cannot go into effect. So who has to compromise now?
It's the House and the Senate.
Congress, yeah. So this put Congress in a deadlock, and a compromise is going to be needed by Congress to settle this issue of Missouri. So Congress got together and said, what can we do to make this work, to get Missouri into the Union? Talmadge's proposal didn't work. They didn't pass. You get that's kind of gone. Okay? So here's what they came up with. 3 things. Compromise was presented and passed through both houses of Congress. Number 1, Maine, who had just submitted their application for admission into the Union, would be able to come in as a free state. What will that do? The balance. Make it even. So just luckily Maine had, applied for admission when they were trying to make this compromise. So the first part of that compromise was that Maine would come in as a free state, equaling the balance. Obviously, Missouri would be admitted as a slave state. So I kind of got that backwards. They'd bring Missouri in, and in return for that, they would bring Maine in. So it equal the balance. Now this is pretty important. You have longitude and latitude on maps, right? What is this right here? What is this called? 3630. This is a imaginary line that goes around the globe that just happens to go through the United States. What's that? Okay, well the equator's down here, but these are longitude and latitudes. And this just happens to be the 36th, I think. Can I see that? Yeah, 36. So this line right here that comes through, the last part of the compromise is all lands north of latitude 3630 that we purchased from who? Big purchase.
France.
Britain. Wait, Spain.
Yeah, but what was the name of it? Thomas Louisiana Purchase. All lands north of the the latitude 3630 would be prohibited from having slavery. So, Maine's coming in as a free state. Missouri's coming in as a slave state. Any lands north of this 36th latitude line, anything north, and there's a lot of land here, isn't there, north? Prohibited to slavery.
So wouldn't that make Missouri a free state? How does that work?
Well, they're gonna let, it's a good question. They're gonna let these guys come in as a slave state. Good question. Everything else north of 36 prohibited. I'll just give you a prelude. This is gonna be a hassle. Nebraska, Kansas later, okay? Anyway, Missouri's north of that, is it not? But they're gonna let it come in as a slave state. That's part of the deal. Maine's gonna come in as a free state. And all the other lands that we purchased by virtue of the Louisiana Territory is going to be prohibiting slavery north of that line. Why in the world would the Southerners accept such a thing, which would prohibit slavery? Why would they do that? Really think here, yeah.
Because they have all of Texas to be a slave state.
But for slavery,
Well, then they have everything south.
which means what?
There's more states.
Why wouldn't they care if there was no slavery in
There's nobody
Iowa, Kansas, Nebraska? Why would they care if there's no slavery there?
Because it's more profit for them.
There's
Why?
nobody over there yet.
Could be. Why do they have slaves in the South?
For the place.
What type?
There's no cotton.
Yes. How much cotton are you growing above
None.
3630?
No.
Not much. So they're thinking they cut a fat hog. Wonderful. We protect all of our lands. We don't care what happens north of 36 because you're not going to grow cotton there anyway. So that makes sense. So they're all for it. Southerners vote for this compromise because they see it as a big benefit for them. We don't care. Great. Make all those states up there free. We're not going to grow any cotton there anyway. Why would the North be happy with this compromise?
No slaves are going to be in those.
And the balance will be even because they would have been behind two, right? Now, this particular compromise became known in American history as the Missouri Compromise. Okay, and the compromise wasn't Tallmadge, right? It was Congress. Tallmadge's amendment only got them talking. The compromise we know as the Missouri Compromise of 1820 was done by Congress. Okay, concern still continues restoring the balance of free and slave because in 1844 Texas comes in, and in 1845 Florida comes in. As what? Slave. So now the balance between the North and South is in favor of the South by 2 states or 4 votes. Well, that was soon handled when Iowa came in 1846 and Wisconsin in 1848. So the point being is this balance is always trying to stay the same. So after the Missouri Compromise, Texas comes in and Florida comes in. Both slave states. All of a sudden, South has a huge advantage, 4 extra votes in the Senate. That is quickly resolved when they bring in Iowa and then Wisconsin. So in 1848, you've got the same number of free states and slave states. How many we have? We had 11, now we put in, it should be 12 and 12, now 13 and 13, 14 and 14, 15 and 15, 16 and 16, where are we at?
14.
Yep, okay. So you had 11 and 11, right? Then you had 12 and 12 with Maine and Missouri, 13 and 13 with Texas and Wisconsin, 14 and 14 with Florida and Iowa. So 14 apiece going into 1848. All right, we'll stop there, but I'll ask you this. What hasn't been decided in the areas that we got from Mexico? Well, what hasn't been decided on what's going to happen there concerning, what about all this land we got here from the Mexican War? It's going to be settled, and what's the big question? Is it going to be settled as a what? Free or slave? And that's where we're going next, and there's going to be some differing opinions on what they should do in the lands that we acquired from Mexico. Should they be slave or free? So this slave and free thing is just going to go on until Civil War.